Part of the Jamestown story is that it isn't just the men who come. And it isn't just pure white Protestant males who come. We do get some women. There are a couple early on, Anne Burris, who was a handmaiden to Mistress Forrest. There's a little girl already there whom historians know a great deal about. Her name was Matuaka, or Pocahontas, or Rebecca, depending on which part of her life you're meeting her. She becomes part of the church story because at one point she is baptized and she does get married in a Church of England ceremony.
Contrary to much American mythology, she does not marry John Smith. She falls in love and marries John Rolfe in 1614. He is the man who adapted Caribbean tobacco to Virginia soil, which ultimately makes Virginia rich. Pocahontas took the baptism name Rebecca, so she is, in the end, Rebecca Rolfe, wife of John Rolfe, a Virginia lady born, to quote the record of her death in the parish register of St. George's Church, Gravesend, in England. She does bear a son named Thomas, born in Virginia in 1615. John, Rebecca, and Thomas Rolfe, and several other Indian men and women visit England in 1616. John Rolfe introduces Pocahontas to King James I, and the family tours England for 7 months. She met the Bishop of London and saw her old friend John Smith momentarily. She does meet the Rolfe family, but then she's taken ill after boarding the ship back to Virginia. She dies and is buried in England at Gravesend. John Rolfe comes back to the colony, leaving Thomas in England to be educated, and marries yet again.
This will be wife number 3 he marries, and there's a long-tailed family that comes from the Rolfes. So there are many, many folks in Virginia who are descended from those lines. We do get women in bigger numbers. By 1610, we have some of the folks who have survived the wreck of the Sea Venture in Bermuda. That was another one of the many ships that came, but it got wrecked in Bermuda, and so it doesn't get here on time, but when it does get here, it brings all the survivors, including some clergy, and including some people who will start long dynastic families all over Virginia. In 1609, 1610, Jamestown is suffering the beginning of what we call the starving time. And they start out the winter with over 500 people in the fort, and by spring only 59 are left alive. And they were reduced to being very much a remnant of the beginning. By 1613, 14, 15, the tobacco was beginning to prove to be a cash crop. By this point, they're shipping tobacco home, and they can see that Virginia is finally going to find and prove itself to be worth all the investment money. It had been a joint stock company, so that making money was a part of their big goal, but it was the tobacco that proved to make them rich. And by these years, you're beginning to see a little bit of that. By 1610 and 11, then there are a few women, because there were some women survivors who come from Bermuda. There are also some women who go up to the Henricus site, which is right outside of Richmond. But then by in the 16 teens, the people in England realized that to fix the people upon the soil, they really need to make homes. So they advertised all over London for 95 young maids, fair and uncorrupt, with household skills. So if you can cook and clean a house and take care of a family, and you can find a man here in the colony who will pay a certain amount of tobacco to pay for your voyage, you can come across and maybe be a bride, which you might not have been in England, especially if you're not real attractive, or if you were a widow, or if you were a spinster. Later on, Colonel Byrd is fond of saying that there were no spinsters in Virginia. Women did not stay single very long. So the marriage business really boomed here. Well, the bride's ships start coming in 1619, and there are several years when they come frequently. One of my park ranger friends says it was the biggest blind date in history, because there are 800 bachelors and all these young ladies. Everybody got married very quickly, lots of weddings in the Jamestown church, and those women started a new life. The women who come have to be pretty sturdy. They have to be willing to put up with the wilderness. There are a number of women who are have come to us through the history books as being famous. I think that the woman who married Richard Buck, who was one of the priests, had to have been an amazing person. She survived the Bermuda experience and survived living in Virginia. I think that Lady Barclay, who was Frances Culpeper Stevens, Matthews Barclay Ludwell. How many husbands did you just count?
There were three: Samuel Stevens, later governor of the Albemarle in North Carolina, Sir William Barclay, governor of Virginia, and Philip Ludwell, treasurer of Virginia and later deputy governor of North Carolina and South Carolina.
I like to call her a governor collector because she just married one governor after another.
Lady Barclay was really quite a force.
She didn't let her gender get in the way. She got involved in politics, and she got involved in anything that was going on. I think that some of the other women who come probably will never know their names or will never know their stories, but you can just imagine what comfort they took in their church. Everything else was falling apart around them, but they had their church to hold on to.
When Governor Barclay arrived in Virginia in 1642, civil war had already commenced in England. Barclay, as a royalist and staunch Anglican, distrusted Puritans and took his instructions from the crown to uphold the Church of England very seriously. Briefly, Barclay acted against Puritans already living in Virginia, forcing them to take an oath of allegiance and banishing 3 Massachusetts clergy who had come to minister to Puritans in lower Norfolk County, south of the James River. Some Virginia Puritans fled to Maryland at this time. However, Barclay avoided persecuting religious minorities for the remainder of his terms as Virginia governor. In 1651 to 1652, 3 years after Parliament beheaded King Charles I and abolished the monarchy, commissioners sent by Parliament to subdue Virginia for Cromwell arrived with a large force. Barclay did some fancy negotiating.
So that as long as we didn't pray for the majesties, we could keep the Book of Common Prayer. He did everything he could to keep the church protected. Governor Barclay meets a young relative whose name is Nathaniel Bacon. Now, there is already a Nathaniel Bacon here, but he is a very conservative, very wise elder statesman. His young cousin, on the other hand, is a bit of a challenge. And Nathaniel the younger doesn't approve of the way Governor Barclay is handling things, so he thinks he can do better. He manages to raise a troop of 500 men of horse from the south side, and they think they can solve all of the problems with the Native Americans. Well, unfortunately, he goes after Indians or Native Americans who are the wrong tribe, and it makes things much worse. Virginia is on fire from Richmond to Virginia Beach, and it took almost 25 years for Virginia to get over Bacon's rebellion. The king calls Governor Barclay back to England and accuses him of doing more harm in this naked country than his father, the infamous Charles I, had done all over England. So Governor Barclay dies in England in disrepute, and Lady Barclay quickly marries yet again another governor and moves on with her life. By 1685, a young man arrives here from Scotland by the name of James Blair.
We will talk about him a great deal later, but we need to look at that year when he comes to be rector of Henrico Parish, or Verona. 4 years later, he is named commissary for the Bishop of London for Virginia.
We had no bishops in the New World, so we had no church management, we had no organization. Each one of our clergy was here to do their very best, but they didn't have any backup and they didn't have any cohesion to get things done.
The commissary comes with few of the powers of a bishop, such as the authority to ordain clergy or to confirm young people. He called a convention of all the clergy together to tell the clergy how to behave and to try to keep them in order, but without real authority, he had limited success in this area.
Well, he was evidently very charming, very handsome, evidently a very good salesman, and he managed to make friends with a lot of people. one of whom was a young lady by the name of Sarah Harrison, whose daddy just happened to be one of the many Benjamin Harrisons. She had already been engaged a couple of times, or promised, and she broke the engagement, which cost her daddy some money and a great deal of shame. And when she fell in love with James Blair, I doubt that her parents were thrilled, but they probably were anxious to get this wedding over with. And there's a wonderful story about her getting to the altar, and the priest says, "Love, honor, and obey," and she says, "No, obey." And then the priest says it again, and she says, "No, obey." And the priest finally looks at Mr. Harrison, who just has had enough.
They get married, and James Blair and Sarah Harrison have a contentious life together until her death in 1713. No babies born that we know of. He becomes the founder of the College of William and Mary and its president for life. He and Governor Nicholson spearhead moving the capital of the colony to Williamsburg in 1699. Blair becomes the rector of Bruton Parish in 1710 and encourages the construction of the 1715 brick church for Bruton Parish.
He gets himself onto the governor's council and makes himself a very outspoken politician who dared to get rid of 3 governors who dared to disagree with him. So he has enormous reach as a clergy person. And James Blair is one of those without whom we wouldn't have Williamsburg, we wouldn't have William and Mary. So for whatever he was like, he got it done. One of the things Blair wanted to do and accomplished was to get a college started. In the great summer of 1619, when they had the first representative assembly in the New World, the same summer we get the first shipment of women and the first shipment of Africans. That summer they chartered a college, and it was to be up at the Henricus site, and it was to be an Indian school to convert
Native American boys and to make sure the Virginia boys grew up to be priests, to help the natives to live under a civil government and to be peaceful. The charter for Henricus College is very important.
They revive it by charter several times, but between the Anglo-Indian Wars and the economics of the time, the college doesn't get off the ground. By 1693, James Blair goes back to England. He persuades King William and Queen Mary
to give him a charter for a college.
And on the back of the Wren building is a wonderful, great big oval plaque. So William and Mary acknowledges, of course, that they came out of this earlier charter. But in, I believe, February 9th of 1693, we get the charter for the College of William and Mary, and the college is begun. James Blair was quite a man and got a great many things done.
In 1698, the State House at Jamestown burns yet again. Blair and Nicholson set their sights on the settlement of Middle Plantation, an agricultural area that began to be settled when settlement fanned out from Jamestown about 1633. We're on the Middle Peninsula between the James and the York Rivers. We're on the Middle Peninsula, so we are Middle Plantation. Middle Plantation is not a farm. It is a community in an agricultural setting. We're a town. The Assembly met in Middle Plantation during Bacon's Rebellion, and the college is here by 1693. Another reason for moving the capital of the colony to Middle Plantation in 1699, then renamed Williamsburg, was that there already was a church here.
As early as the 1660s, Middlesex County records refer to the old church at Middle Plantation because they're getting ready to build a new church, so they are going to build a church just like it. It was a small wooden structure.
In 1674, the General Assembly combines Middleton Parish and Marston Parish to form Bruton Parish. By 1683, Bruton Parish here has decided to build a new brick church to replace a wooden church in which they had been meeting.
A parish was an area. Some of them were 2 miles wide and 60 miles long. Some of them were 4 miles by 5 miles. This one happens to be a nice 10 miles square.
Having moved from James City Parish to Bruton Parish in 1710, Blair's 10-mile square parish of Bruton includes the city of Williamsburg and the rural areas in parts of both James City County and Upper York County.
With many parishes, there was a chapel of ease at one end and the main church at the other end. And they would have a lay reader or a parish clerk read the prayers at the chapel of ease, and they had the services with the sacraments done at the chapel.
And as settlement fanned out from Jamestown, the parish system followed with the church at Middle Plantation, 6 miles from Jamestown.
These are not people running away from God. These are people who believe they're missionaries for the Church of England. So we're right where we're supposed to be because we're 6 miles from Jamestown.
Once the capital of the colony moved to Middle Plantation and Bruton Parish in 1699, the 1683 church got to be too little and they needed a bigger one. We get the college and then we get the capital, and now they have every reason to build a bigger church in order to accommodate government officials who come into Williamsburg to attend the House of Burgesses and the High Courts. Bruton's vestry levies a tax on parishioners to pay for a new brick church to replace the earlier one. They ask Alexander Spotswood to make a plan, and the governor himself and the House of Burgesses contribute money to supplement the parish levy, because it took quite a bit of money to build this place. By late 1715, it was nearly ready.
There might have been 105 households. This is just a wide place in the road. Duke of Gloucester Street was a horse path that ran down the ridge of the peninsula. And so with a capitol, a courthouse, a church, a tavern, a brick oven, and a couple of stores, they've got the beginning of a town. And as it matures, down the road, we're going to have what I think are the biggest buildings in all 13 colonies, and they're all in one town.